The National Democratic Front of the Philippines is once more taking a step towards continuing the peace negotiations with the government of the Republic of the Philippines. This, 6 years after the termination of the peace negotiations by then President Rodrigo Duterte through Proclamation 360 on November 23, 2017. The National Democratic Front's resolve to pursue peace negotiations stems from its determination to fulfill the Filipino people's aspirations to address the root causes of the armed conflict. It is our goal that the peace negotiations would result in comprehensive agreements on socio-economic, political, and constitutional reforms and provide the solution to problems which have long burdened the Filipino people. In line with our commitment to return to the negotiating table, the NDFP shall reconstitute its panel and appoint new members before the start of the formal talks. The parties are in constant communications and both are working towards holding the formal talks. We know that the quest for genuine peace has no shortcuts. The road to freedom, democracy, and social justice is long, winding, and difficult. There are still many serious concerns and issues that need to be discussed, addressed, and worked on by the parties that would help advance the peace negotiations. These are, among others, as follows. 1. The participation of detained NDFP consultants in the peace negotiations. The role of the NDFP consultants in forging agreements cannot be overemphasized. Hence, we will continue to work for their release to enable them to contribute their knowledge and expertise to the peace negotiations. 2. The assurance of safety and immunity for those involved in the peace negotiations. The safety and immunity guarantees of those participating in the peace negotiations will help facilitate the negotiations and create a favorable atmosphere and obviate any incident that may jeopardize the peace negotiations. 3. The general, unconditional, and omnibus release of all political prisoners. And 4. The abrogation of the unjustified terrorist designation of the NDFP, its panel members, consultants, and others who are working for peace. We will continue to seek effective measures to address these serious issues and concerns and create a conducive conditions necessary to achieve a just and lasting peace. We call on all stakeholders and their constituencies to support and push the parties in pursuing the peace negotiations to address the persistence of mass poverty, social inequality, and economic underdevelopment that has fueled the armed conflict for decades. And then find ways to address the roots of the armed conflict and thus achieve a just and lasting peace. In the peace negotiations, we are constantly guided by the mutually acceptable principles of national sovereignty, democracy, and social justice. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. 4 days ago, President Marcos Jr. of the GRP issued Proclamation 404 to grant amnesty to the CPP, NPA, and DFP, among other groups. The amnesty claims to seek, quote, peace, unity, and reconciliation, unquote. Since the very beginning of the peace negotiations, many decades ago, the NDFP has always asserted that a just and lasting peace can only be attained by addressing the roots of the civil war. This kind of amnesty program does not address an, to the socioeconomic and political factors that drive Filipinos to rebel. It fails to provide the opportunity to enact social, economic, and political reforms that will pave the way for a just and lasting peace. Any amnesty program shall be the result of negotiated peace that is based on justice and addressing the roots of the civil war. In fact, this was discussed in the previous negotiations, but such negotiations were terminated 6 years ago. By that time, the two parties, through their respective technical working groups, had already discussed and agreed upon a substantial portion of the comprehensive agreement on social and economic reforms. The parties had even set up committees for the remaining substantive agendas, namely political and constitutional reforms, and end of hostilities and disposition of the armed forces. Sadly, this momentum had been dissipated and lost. Today, more and more Filipinos and their groups are clamoring for resumption of the peace negotiations and address the roots of the armed conflict. Amnesty declarations or not, jailed peace consultants need to be released, as well as the more than 800 political prisoners unjustly kept in prison on the basis of a negotiated mode or modes of release arising from bilateral peace negotiations. Thank you.
So, ganun po yun. The talks or the negotiations will start when the NDFP consultants would be able to participate and my assurance of safety and immunity for those involved in the peace negotiation. And then the general and conditional omnibus release of all political prisoners.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat dito. Okay. So magandang pakinggan po no yung amnesty, pag-grant ng amnesty. Pero sa akin pong pakiwari, so ako po, pag gusto nating mag-grant ng amnesty, dapat ito ay general, unconditional, at saka omnibus.
The general, unconditional, and omnibus release of all political prisoners.
Okay? Walang mga kondisyon kung gusto talaga nating magkaroon ng unity, reconciliation, katulad ng sinasabi ni Secretary Galvez. Okay? So, yun po, unang-unang manifestation ko yun. Kaya lang, nilagay dito, Mr. Chair, sa Section 1 ng Proclamation 404, included yung former members and front organizations. So, sa Proclamation 404, ano yung sinasabi ninyo dito mga front organizations? Kahit na ngayon, Mr. Chair, kahit na yung organization po, kami sa Makabayan, ang ACT, ang Gabriela, sinasabing front organization yan. So, ibig ba sabihin, pagpapasuko ito ng mga membro, ng mga, aside from member ng CPP-NP, NDF, ay mga front organization. So, dapat, Mr. Chair, matanggal yung front organization and kasi general yun na sinasabi. Okay? Former rebel, sinasabi po, former members and front organizations. So, former members of CPP-NPA and front organization. So, sino yun?
Even while there are the forces of armed revolution, there are the legal democratic forces in the Philippines. The biggest of these is bagong alyansang Makabayan or Bayan in short. It has a membership of more than 2 million members in more than 1,000 member organizations. Its biggest component organizations are Kilusang Mayo Uno, which is the labor center, the Pambansang Kilusang Magbubukid, which is the Kilusang Magbubukid ng Pilipinas or KMP, Gabriela, the Women's Alliance, League of Filipino Students, Alliance of Concerned Teachers, Cadena, and so on.
Masyadong general and vague. Okay? So lahat na tutukuyin ninyo, lahat ng alam niyo naman ang Makabayan o alam niyo naman yung mga organisasyon na nagsasalita vocally against mga policy ng government, di ba? Binabansag ang mga rebelde yan or whatever, na supporter or whatever. So dapat tanggalin yung yung front organizations doon, Mr. Chair. Yung Section 1 ng Proclamation 404, Mr. Chair, why include former members of front organizations? Ayun na naman, Mr. Chair, nilagay na naman yung front organizations. So kung babasahin ito, hindi lang red tagging ang organization, ito rin ay guilt by association. 'Di ba? So kung parehas kayo ng parehas kayo ng isang rebel group ng pinaniniwalaan, kahit hindi ka naman rebelde, na-associate ka. Kasi dun sa word na front organizations. Okay? So this is red tagging ng organization, true surrendery. This is guilt by association. So walang due process. Kasi lahat na, nilihat mo na yung mga front organization na nilabel na front organization ng isang legal na organisasyon by mere existence ng isang amnesty applicant. Okay? Kung meron diyang sasabihin nila applicant o sinasabi nila surrendery, sinasabi nila member sila ng ganitong organization, front organization, na-associate na sila. Okay? So, ganun po. Kaya sinasabi natin dito na inconsistent yung dapat tanggalin yung yung salitang front organization, Mr. Chair.
There are the legal democratic forces in the Philippines. Gabriela, the Women's Alliance, Alliance of Concerned Teachers.
Well, parang sinasabi niyo na rin po yung ibang paniniwala ng tao, 'di ba? Yung ibang paniniwala po ng tao ay hindi natin ina-accept dahil kasasabi niyo kanina, parang he has to surrender pati yung kanilang mindset, babaguhin niyo yung mindset, etc., no? So, yun po Mr. Chair. So, ito lang po, ang masasabi ko lang po, kung gusto nating mag-grant ng amnesty, it should be general, unconditional, and omnibus.
The general, unconditional, and omnibus release of all political prisoners.
So, yun po, Mr. Chair. At tanggalin po yung front organization. Tanong ko kanina, Mr. Chair, yun po yung front organization, dapat tanggalin yun doon sa, nilagay nyo doon sa Proclamation 404 or doon sa HCR 20.
Secretary?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, nagkakaisa naman tayo sa mithiing kamtin ang kapayapaan sa ating bayan. Pero para kamtin yung kapayapaan, kailangan din talaga, katulad nga again, sapulin yung ugat ng sigalot ng pag-aarmas ng mamamayan natin. Yung kahirapan, yung malawak na kawalan ng lupa, yung kagutuman,
That a just and lasting peace can only be attained by addressing the roots of the civil war. This kind of amnesty program does not address the socio-economic and political factors that drive Filipinos to rebel.
With regards to this concurrent resolutions para sa amnesty proclamation, yung basic problem na ito, para kasing yung amnesty, humakbang na siya agad ng maraming leagues, parang ganyan. Tapos, without an existing peace process before the actual end of hostilities. So parang classic case siya ng nauna na yung karawahe dun sa ano, gusto mong gusto mong tapusin dun sa simula pa lang, parang ganyan. So kaya nagwo-worry po kami dun sa mga provisions nung proclamation per se, lalong-lalo na doon sa maaring ma-restore yung Republic Act 1700 or the Anti-Subversion Act na nagpipinalize ng membership in subversive organizations espousing political beliefs. Hindi po nito pinag-iiba yung humahawak ng armas or yung unarmed citizens natin. Tapos sa pagbanggit ng front organizations, actually ito case natin to kasi palaging ginagamit ito para sa red tagging ng mga people's organizations, non-government organizations, civil society organizations, mas lalo lamang itong gagamitin ng National Task Force for the Elimination of Local Communist Armed Conflict para mag-red tag, mangharas, mag-profiling, at iba pa na maaaring malagay sa panganib yung mga aktivista at mas lalong dumami yung human rights violations natin. Posible rin gamitin, samantalahin sa mga amnesty program para sa fake and forced surrenderies. Kasi 'di ba, dagdag pa yung sa e-clip, may mga anomalies and irregularities tayong naririnig diyan Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, yun bukod doon, parang sinasabi nga natin na it would be better talaga if yung mapapresent na amnesty proclamation comes from the product of the actual peace negotiation. So we are calling for the resumption of the peace talks and truly i-address yung root causes ng armed conflict. Kasi mas ganun yung tingin namin kasi may mga certain, may mga maaari na ipuput forward sila on halimbawa kung ang amnestia ay mag-grant to all Filipinos and covered by the proclamation, tapos may uphold yung Hernandez Doctrine regarding common crimes committed or alleged to be committed in furtherance of one's political beliefs, baka po ma-include yung mga ganong kasi we're talking of jurisprudence kanina so pwede naman yun, tapos, Mr. Chair, yung dito sa particular, sa proclamation, worried din kami doon sa applicants will only be issued a certificate of amnesty. Siyempre, di ba, hindi naman natin alam kung saan gagamitin or kung later on, mas mamroblema yung nag-file ng amnesty. Kung wala siyang kasiguruhan ng kanyang seguridad, safety, di ba? Kahit naman yun, yung may question din ng confidentiality clause siguro. Qualifications as to how information may be used, Wala kasing absolute guarantee kung paano gagamitin kung nag-apply ng amnesty. So, Mr. Chair, yun yung mga agam-agam namin dito sa particular sa proclamation number 404, Siguro yun nga, Mr. Chair, on the table yung lahat. Pero it is really a thorn yung terrorist tagging sa ganyang condition. So what do we want? Parang ganyan. Para sa amin, sa Makabayan, we would want a general na amnesty, meaning all political prisoners, alleged political offenders, or others as defined, will be covered by the amnesty program. Unconditional means walang precondition na set before they can be released. They will not have to go through a tedious application process and will not be required to plead guilty or make any admissions. They only need to be covered by the definition and effectivity of the proclamation. The operative act needed to effect their immediate release is their inclusion in a pre-screened list and acceptance of the general, unconditional, and omnibus amnesty proclamation. And on this omnibus, kasi all charges or offenses as defined in the proclamation are covered by the amnesty. Yun po, kaya tinawag na general, unconditional, omnibus amnesty proclamation.
The general, unconditional, and omnibus release of all political prisoners.
That is what we would want, sana. That is what we would want, sana. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Brosas.